Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2026 Heritage Trust Fund Grant Workshop. We are going to get started this morning and go through several slides, some background information about the Heritage Trust Fund program, and then get into a screen-by-screen walkthrough of the application itself. The application is online. That way you'll kind of know what to expect if you haven't looked at it already. And we will proceed from there. I am Katrina Ringler. I am the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer here at the Kansas Historical Society in the Preservation Office. I am filling in at the moment because our grant manager position is vacant, and we are trying to get that filled as soon as possible. But in the meantime, I can answer questions and hopefully get you guys through the application process. So let's get started here. A little bit of background about the program. It was created in 1990. To date, we have awarded out over $32 million in awards. And those funds come from collections that are done at the local level through the county register of deeds. When folks file their deeds, when they buy property, there is a fee collected by the counties, and that fee is then passed up to the state treasurer's office. And the collections add up over the course of the year. And at the end of the year, when we do the grant round, we basically give out as much money as we can that's been collected. No county pays in more than $30,000 per year to the system. And there are a couple of things that are mandated by statute that we have to keep in mind as we're awarding grants, such as the statute says we have to disperse the money back across the state as much as possible geographically, and that half of all the funding every year has to go to city, county, or local historical society type organizations. The rest is distributed to whoever the grant committee chooses to award it to. So we'll talk more about that as we go along. This is a reimbursement program. You'll hear me say that about 40 times in the course of this presentation today. It is probably the number one thing that people misunderstand about the program when they're applying or when they get an award. So I'm going to try to emphasize that as much as possible. This is a grant program that has a maximum award of up to $100,000. The minimum amount that we can give out is $5,000. And we reimburse 80% of project costs up to the $100,000 limit or whatever the application or whatever the award is that you applied for. The asterisk there is to indicate that for-profit corporations by statute are allowed to be reimbursed only 50%. It is still a $100,000 maximum award, but basically what that means is there has to be a dollar for dollar match for for-profit corporations. Individuals, other small businesses, nonprofits, local governments, those types of organizations are still 80% reimbursement. What that means is that the recipient ends up providing cash match of 20% at the end of the project. You will pay bills as they come due, and then we will reimburse you the 80%. It is imperative that you have cash in hand when you start the project because we do not pay the contractors or consultants. That is the applicant to pay those, and then we reimburse you. Eligible properties include any property that's listed in the National Register of Historic Places, the Register of Historic Kansas Places, or that's a contributing property to a register listed district, either national or state register. That slide is wrong. Properties owned by the state or the federal government are not eligible, but properties owned by local governments, counties, cities, school districts are eligible. And there is sometimes a tendency in our office to talk a lot about buildings because that's what we see the most. But the Heritage Trust Fund is also eligible for other types of resources that are listed in the registers, including parks, cemeteries, bridges, archaeological sites. and even the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe locomotive 3415 in Abilene, which is listed in the register. They received a grant last year. So not just buildings, it can also be other resources that are National Register and State Register listed. So as I mentioned, for-profit corporations are treated a little bit differently with the reimbursement of grant awards. There is also a requirement written in statute that for-profit corporations must show us basically that the grant is to the benefit of the historic property and is not just going to make the project more profitable. So there has to be some demonstration in the application that the property's continued existence is threatened or that the property's rehabilitation is not economically feasible without grant assistance. There's no specific place in the grant application to make this clear. So it's just something that needs to be clarified throughout the application as you write your narrative answers. The kind of work that's eligible for the Heritage Trust Fund includes all of these things you see on the screen, rehabilitation of the property, restoration, preservation, and even non-construction activities, such as doing some planning, analysis, writing up structures reports, those kind of things. But not all of these activities are going to be as successful as others. In general, proposals to repair and preserve the exterior envelope of the building compete better than projects to simply update an already stable or sound building. So, for example, if Lauren has a building with a hole in the roof and I have a building that is in really good shape but just needs a bathroom remodel, the grant committee is going to probably consider her project to be more urgent and more worthy of funding than my project. No work should begin on the project until the grant award is announced in February of 2026. The grant administrator for the project has attended an orientation session with SHPO staff, and the owner has signed a grant agreement. That's what actually encumbers the money in our state accounting fund, and gets the project eligible in the state budget, basically. Someone asked a question about historic districts. Yes, historic districts, well, individual properties within a historic district are eligible. The property owner must be the applicant. And so three property owners can't get together and apply for three properties together as one application. Those would have to be three separate applications. But if there is one property owner who owns multiple buildings or multiple resources within a historic district, and those resources are contributing to the historic district, then yes, those are eligible. Some things that are not eligible for the grant are on the screen here. New additions, interpretive displays like the signage you see in the background there. Acquisition of property we get asked about a lot. Unfortunately, I don't know of any funding to buy property. Um, Relocating structures can be eligible, but we have to have approval of that through the SHPO staff before that happens, because that sometimes can affect the register listing of the property, and it has to maintain the register listing during the relocation to be eligible for the grant. Grant administration expenses are not eligible for reimbursement. And there's also a note that general maintenance expenses are not eligible, and that's really at the discretion of the grant committee. Um, Keep in mind, there are certain things that all property owners are expected to do towards maintaining their property. And so things like cleaning the gutters or touching up paint might be seen as sort of general maintenance by the grant committee. What we're really looking for, and you'll see this more as we go through the application, are the urgent, critical needs of the property to get it repaired, preserved, rehabilitated, and back into use. So general maintenance type projects tend not to be as competitive and successful in getting awards. There are more ineligible activities listed in the program information guide, which is found on our website. So it's important to understand a couple of details about what will happen after the grant is awarded so that you can set up your application for success. All grant recipients must sign a project agreement, sometimes called a grant agreement, which defines the scope of work, the schedule, the reimbursement criteria, including approved budget line items, and other conditions of the grant award. The scope of work, schedule, and budget are drawn directly from your application. So what you put in your application will become part of the agreement after the award is made. As I said before, no project work should begin until the project agreement is signed and the administrator has attended an orientation with us. And then there's also going to be a requirement for competitive bidding that we'll talk more about here in a little bit. Work really realistically won't start until next spring or summer of 2026. And all HTF grant recipients must inform us if there's any significant problems, delays, or adverse conditions that might alter your scope of work or schedule. Monthly progress reports are required during the course of a grant period. And so those are just some things to think about as you're working on your application to keep in mind. Again, this is a reimbursement program. I told you I'd say that about 40 times. And it's important to understand how the match works and how the reimbursement works. The grantee will pay 100% of invoices as they come due and payable. Heritage Trust Fund will reimburse the grantee 80% for most awardees and 50% for for-profit corporations upon approval of a reimbursement request. Those reimbursement requests include photos of the completed work, an invoice for the work, proof of payment, a request and on a request form. The Heritage Trust Fund cannot directly pay contractors or consultants. As you pay contractors, there will be more about how contractors must be selected and hired later when we talk about the budget, and you'll submit that with your application. Someone was asking, do you pay a certain day of the month or as bills are received? So to clarify that, there is a grant agreement between you and I, the Historical Society, and the grantee that says we will reimburse upon presentation and approval of the grant or the grant reimbursement request. And we process those as quickly as possible. Our goal is 30 days. When you pay the contractor is between you and the contractor based on the contract that you establish with them. We have to review your process of hiring the contractor, and we review the contract to make sure it has certain language in it, but we do not have any involvement in how you interact with the contractor and how you'd agree to pay bills. And yes, we will talk more about budget line items here in a minute and how we reimburse based on those. Thank you. So a couple of deadlines to keep in mind. The application deadline for this grant round is November 3rd, 2025. It's typically November 1st, but that falls on a weekend. So it's a Monday, November 3rd, 2025. And the grant awards will be announced in February of 2026. We don't have that date set yet. The Historic Sites Board of Review that actually makes those awards, they have not set their calendar for 26 yet. That will be set coming up in a few weeks on October 4th, I believe. Just a word of warning, November 3rd, the grant application actually will turn off, expire, go offline at 11:59 p.m. So right at midnight, basically, on that evening. You will be able to save a draft of your application and continue it later. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And we are warning folks a couple of times here to remember to add attachments at the end of your application process. There have been some updates to the system, but attachments don't always stick to the application when you save it to continue later. So make sure you do that sort of at the end. To get ready to submit the application, there are a couple of things that you'll want to get prepared. The program information is the background information and instructions. That document is found on our website. You'll see the link there at the bottom. And then the application itself is also linked with an Apply Now button on the website. Please read over that carefully before you start filling out anything. The application has to be submitted through that online form stack platform. And we strongly recommend that you just go through and view the form first, read through it, maybe take some notes, take screenshots if you like, go back and use this recording of this webinar, and then use a document like a Word doc or a Google Doc offline that you save to your computer to write out your narrative answers. That way you can edit, draft, have people review it. And then once you're ready to upload the application, you can just cut and paste those answers into the appropriate places. Take note of character limits that are on some of the answer boxes. These are character limits, not word limits, and character limits to include spaces. So just another note here about the function of the online application that allows you to save and resume later. When you press, when you press save and resume later link at the bottom of the application, you'll see a message that comes up that looks like this. And a couple things to note, that link is only good for 30 days. Um, what my experience has been is if you open the application to edit and save it again, you will get a new link. So it's really important to save that link. And as you see here at the bottom of the screen, there is also the opportunity for you to put your email address in and have the link emailed to you so that you can save it. Um, there is no way for my staff or myself to find your application if you lose the link. It does not come into our side of the FormStack system until you hit submit. And so it just lives out there in the cloud and we don't have access to it. Updates to the system recently seem to indicate that attachments do kind of stick to the saved form now. But even this message that I just printed off last night still says that that attachments may not be available. So I would not rely on that to upload your attachments to the application until you're actually ready to submit it. Okay, so where to find the grant application? It is on our website. I'm sorry, that is an old web link. Our URL for our agency now is kansashistory.gov, but the number \14617 is still accurate. And honestly, if you go to kshs.org, it still redirects you to the new URL. Apologies for that. But on our webpage, under the Heritage Trust Fund webpage, you will see the big button in the middle, Apply Now. I tried to make it as big and bold as possible. Above that, you'll see that there are 3 links to documents that you will need to download, sign, and then upload with your application. And thank you to Lauren or somebody who put the actual link in the chat. Above the 3 links is also the paragraph that kind of says applications for the Heritage Trust Fund grant are now available. And there's a link there that says program information. A lot of the information we're going over today is in that program information, and it's important that you open that up and read it before you start applying. So as you open the application, when you hit apply now, you will see this landing page that gives you a little bit of information about, basically confirms for you that you're applying for the right thing, that you're in the right place. And there's a note there again about attachments may not actually attach if you're saving them to come back to later. So just keep that in mind. As we get into the application here, you'll see that there are distinct parts, and basically each part has a certain function for review and administration of the grant later. Some of this early stuff is really just contact information, making sure we understand who's applying for the grant, what property they're applying for, who should be our point of contact, and a little bit about the project in general. And then we will get into the part of the application that talks more about what you're doing, why it needs to be done, why do you need the funding. And those all tie back to the statute that created the grant that allows the grant committee to assess and kind of weigh the applications against each other. There's no formal ranking system for this program because the statute sets it up and says, well, basically these things need to be taken into consideration, and all of those things are listed in the grant application. So the grant committee will take those things into consideration, weigh applications against each other, and then make their formal recommendation to the Historic Sites Board of Review in February. So getting started with Section A, that is the grant applicant information. The grant applicant needs to be the legal property owner as of November 3rd. They will remain the owner throughout the duration of the project, plus 5 years after the date of the closeout of the project. It is part of the grant agreement that we sign with grantees that they will maintain the building or the property and maintain ownership of the property for 5 years following completion of the grant. So it's important that we establish upfront who the property owner is because they will be the grantee. If the property has more than one owner, all parties must provide proof of agreement with the application. And if funded, the agreement will have to be signed and agreed to by all of the property owners. You are required to provide proof of ownership with your application. At the end, there's an opportunity to upload an attachment to provide that documentation. The name of the property owner needs to be the same name as the legal ownership. So if it's an individual, a trust, an LLC, a corporation, whatever that is, that's where we want that here. And then it must match the name of the proof of ownership that's supplied with the documentation. Someone has a question. Can we discuss a second applicant? In our county, the Economic Development Office provides a lot of support. If we aren't able to assist in the follow-up on the process, then things can get stuck. When I move to the next section, I think, or two sections from now, are the property, let me go down. The grant administrator, and I think that might be where you would come into that. The Economic Development Office could serve as the project administrator and be the one that sort of does the day-to-day work of administrating the grant to keep it on track. So we'll get to that next. In section B of the application, this is about the property itself. What is the historic name of the property? If you're not sure, there is a URL there for the Kansas Historic Resources Inventory. And so you can search by property address, you can search by name, you can search by city or county. And whatever the name of the property is in the KHRI is probably what we call it and what we know it by. So properties sometimes can have different names. It may be officially in our records as the Smith House, but everybody locally knows it as the Jones residence. So, whatever you put, we'll figure it out as long as we can have the address and everything after on the bottom part there. Make sure you have the address there, the county, and then we also ask for the congressional district because we do want to make sure that we are notifying our representatives that there's something in their district that has been funded and there's a project underway. You will note that several of these fields have asterisks by them. Those are all required fields. So you have to put something in those fields. If it's something that you don't think applies to your property, you can put not applicable, but something has to go into the field. So this is the section I was talking about, the Stafford County Economic Development question here. The grant administrator should be the point of contact for the program. The state statute says that part of the grant committee's information that they will take into consideration is the administrative ability of the applicant. And so we want to have one point of contact on the project if it gets funded. And we want to make sure that that person has the information that they need to actually be the point of contact and that they are willing and know that they are the point of contact. More than once, we've had people um, put a name on this section of the application, and then when they get the notice of award in February, they have no idea what we're talking about. So make sure that if you're putting someone down as the grant administrator, they know that they're going to be the grant administrator and that they're willing to do that job. And then at the bottom of that section, of course, we have their contact information, but at the bottom, it's asking for a brief description, a brief statement on why this person is qualified and suitable for this role. Maybe they've managed grants in the past. Maybe they have a lot of information and knowledge about the project. Whatever it is that is your thinking about why they are good to be the administrator, make that statement there. The administrator can be the same as the property owner, but they don't have to be, and they aren't always, and that's perfectly fine. Okay. Section D asks you to tell us what is the applicant's status. So basically categorize the property owner. Are they an individual? Are they a local government, a nonprofit organization? Are they an unincorporated business? Are they a for-profit corporation? Or are they something else? And if there's something else, there's room there to describe it. There's a question about co-administrators. Yes, definitely there can be co-administrators. The form only allows you to put one name and one contact, but if you have room, I would put other names and information, at least a name at this point in the description box, because we are only going to contact the one person, but once the grant is awarded, it's understandable. There might be someone who is going to handle the bookkeeping and someone who's going to handle the reporting or someone who's going to handle the construction aspect of the project and someone who's going to handle more of the paperwork aspect of the project. And so that's perfectly understandable. Again, section D, just do what fits the category of the applicant the best. And then section E is basically categorizing, excuse me, the property itself. Is the property a National Historic Landmark, which is not the same as a National Register property? There are only about 24 or 25 National Historic Landmarks in the state of Kansas. So more than likely your property is not one of those. Double check with the SHPO's office if you're not sure, or you can look on the Kansas Historic Resources Inventory as well. Our phone number here is 785-272-8681, extension 240. There's information at the end of this presentation that has that on a slide. But if you are not sure either way or you can't find it in the KHRI, feel free to reach out to us. The other question here is, does the property owner intend to apply for historic tax credits? And this is important to understand so that we know if we can coordinate some of the reviews that we do internally with other staff on our in our office. And we can kind of get a sense of how big this project is and what all it might entail. Someone is asking if grants are available for preparation of register nominations. Not this grant program. The Heritage Trust Fund grant program does not fund that, But another grant program that we have, the Historic Preservation Fund, HPF, does. Those applications are available later in the winter, usually around the first of the year, and are awarded in May or June. So as we get into sort of the main body of the grant application, you'll see that these are just free form big boxes. Section F is asking you to give a very brief, you'll see it's 750 characters, really a couple sentences, a very short paragraph. What is the project about? And this is something like you might say funding is needed to address 24 original windows in the Smith house. The windows are suffering from rot and deterioration. Something that simple is all we're looking for here. This gives the grant committee, as they're reviewing applications, a preview so that they understand as they get more into your narratives what you're trying to do, what your goal is, and what this grant is really about. It's a window project, it's a roof project, it's a masonry project. So as they read your other answers, they understand that. Section G is asking about the historical significance of the property and asking you to explain how this property reflects events, trends, significant people in state, local, or national history. And it's important to understand that um, every everyone who's applying for this grant has a property listed in the state or the National Register of Historic Places. So reiterating that this property is listed on the National Register, that's why it's significant, does not really convey any additional information to the grant committee. What you really want to do is dig into that nomination or dig into the history you know about the property and explain why this is really important. It needs to be preserved, it needs to be repaired, protected, rehabilitated. Um, you know, you're competing with 46 to 60 other applicants from across the state, and everyone's project is important, either at the local, state, or national level. And so you have to make your case about why yours should be funded over someone else's. Don't assume that the Heritage Trust Fund Grant Committee understands the importance of your project or even knows, has ever seen it before or knows what it is. Um, the grant committee will be made up of volunteers from the Historic Sites Board of Review. They may have seen your property recently when it was listed to the register, if it was done recently. But if your property was listed 20 or 40 years ago, they may have never heard of your property. So getting a good understanding of why it's significant will be critical. Section H has to do with, again, the statute that oversees the grant program. It requires applicants to demonstrate the potential benefit to the community as well as community support for the project. So here you want to be sure to summarize how much support you have from the community. Later, you'll be able to back up that support with letters of support that you can upload and attach to the application. But you want to summarize here the community support of the project and demonstrate how that support is basically supporting your project. So if the property is open to the public, if you provide tours annually, if you invite school children in, if it's just a keystone in the community that everybody drives by every day, try to look for supporters that will back you up and say, yes, this project is needed. We're looking for summaries here of that support and how it interacts and how it supports the community. Um, Private, I will be very honest, private properties sometimes have a harder time of making the case and the argument for this than public buildings or buildings that have a commercial use. So try to think outside of the box a little bit. Think about who, besides you as the private property owner, utilizes the building, who appreciates the building, who sees it every day, who would miss it if it was gone. That's the kind of thought that you want to, the mindset you want to get in when you're answering that question. Section I, again, refers back to the statute that says the condition of the property, the urgency of the preservation work is part of the criteria that the grant committee will take into consideration. Urgency is really a critical piece for the grant committee. Um, in my experience of working with grant committees, that is something that they look at pretty high on their list of priorities. If the need isn't urgent, then why are we funding it? That's kind of their viewpoint a lot of times. So in this section, you want to briefly describe how the property came to be in its current condition. Has the property been maintained by you or maybe a previous owner? Maybe a previous owner did not do a lot of maintenance and that's how it got in the condition it's in now. Maybe there was storm damage. Maybe it's just a failure of materials. Not all historic materials were built to last. So you want to describe the most urgent current preservation need that is being seen in the project. Usually for buildings, it's going to be the exterior envelope, something having to do with the roof, walls, windows, foundations, maybe a structural issue. Um, those tend to be the most urgent needs because we're trying to keep the elements, the water out. Explain how that need ranks against some other issues that you may be facing that may be lower priority. And section J kind of builds on this and asks you to say, um, how is the property endangered? Now, it could be endangered physically, like literally, there is a development encroaching on the property, erosion is threatening the structural stability of the property. The building could be suffering from some sort of lack of maintenance by a previous owner, or like I said, storm damage or something. But there could also be just endangerment because there was damage in the past and water got in and now we're literally in danger of losing the plaster off the walls, the decorative plaster in this historic theater or this historic church. It's in danger because if it's not utilized, it's been vacant for 20 years. And if we don't get it fixed up and utilized, we're in danger of losing this property to eventual demolition. So clearly explain how the proposed project will address this endangerment. Um, Again, the grant committee is looking for projects to fund that are going to save buildings if at all possible, not just make improvements to buildings in already pretty good condition. Section K has 3 parts. This is the first part. Be sure to answer all of the questions in each part. So this top one is asking you to explain why the Heritage Trust funds are being requested for the project and describe any past expenditures that you as the applicant have made towards the repair and maintenance. If you are a new property owner, you may have to explain a little bit about how a previous property owner did or didn't, again, do maintenance. But you could talk about how much you've expended on the acquisition of the property and just getting it online and getting this application prepared. Um, State your case for why you think the grant is going to be needed in these sections. The second section of Part K asks you to identify sources of funding that are available to you. Are you applying for any grants, loans, state or federal tax credits again? And then how much cash funding is available to you for paying invoices as they come due, and explain where that money is going to come to, how you are going to get basically your hands on that funding, or how is it made available to you to be able to pay the contractors as their bills come due. As I noted earlier, the cash on hand for your project is critical. Explaining how you intend or plan to pay contractors will help the grant committee understand that you have the capacity and capability of doing this project, that you're not going to run into problems halfway through the project with trying to find funds to get the project done. And then there will be an opportunity at the end of the application for you to provide documentation of these of these funds. So a bank statement or something like that that allows you to demonstrate that you have the capacity to do the project. Section L gets into the budget request. And there's a little bit of information at the top of that page to just kind of clarify how the budget should be looked at and set up. Again, this is a reimbursement program, and as someone asked earlier about line items, the line items you put in this budget request will transfer over to your grant agreement. And it is these line items that we will reimburse for. Now, it is important to understand, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, that these have to be 100% completable things, line items. So as you see in the example here on the page on the screen, a roof, north windows, south windows. There could be masonry on the north side or the south side. But it has to be something that we can look at and say, that is finished, and then we can reimburse for it. If you have a roof with multiple parts, like maybe there's a flat roof section and a shingle roof section, those could be two separate things because one of those could be finished while the other one is still underway or hasn't started yet. But we can't reimburse for something that's partially done. So again, a roof that is just, we take off the old roof, we can't reimburse for that. We can't reimburse for the new roof being halfway done. It has to be all of the way done, finished for us to do reimbursement. So line items are important. If you do line items in your budget that don't correlate with 100% completable, finished segments of work, we probably will adjust those in the grant agreement. Um, yeah, I think I've hit on that, the reimbursement aspect of it a lot. So as you look down at the budget section of the grant application, there needs to be at least one proposed budget line item. As you see, there's an asterisk there by item number 1. The form allows up to 6 items. We encourage applicants to focus their project down to 5 or 6 line items and request grant funds for the most urgent preservation concerns. But as you'll see in a moment, there is an opportunity for you to submit additional information if you need. Keep in mind again, too, we'll talk more about this in a minute, but competitive bidding is required for any work over $5,000. HTF grantees are not required to accept the lowest bid when seeking contractors or consultants, but you do have to show us that you went through the process of seeking bids and that you are contracting with someone who is qualified to do the work. We are going to review the project on the back end if you're funded. We are going to be reviewing your scope of work, basically these line items with additional detail to make sure that the work meets the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And if you have any questions about that, or you would like to talk more about what does or doesn't qualify or meet the standards, just reach out to the SHPO staff. At the bottom of the budget page, the form will automatically total for you the subtotal of construction costs and calculate automatically a 20% contingency. We have found over the course of doing these projects that that's really important to have that contingency in place. And I think maybe even more so now with fluctuations in market pricing. So having about a 20% cushion in your budget, just in case bids come back higher than you expect, is going to be helpful and important. The contingency funds, I know it's confusing, but the 20% is not related in any way to your 20% match. It is literally adding 20% onto the budget to give you a cushion so that if bids come back higher than expected, you are not stuck with a grant that you can't do anything with because you don't have enough money to fund the project. So we're adding a little bit of cushion to the budget to give you a little bit more wiggle room. If your project will require the services of an architect or an engineer, and you want those services to be reimbursed by the grant, be sure and put those as one of the budget line items, or include it here as a consultant fee. If it's something that you are going to pay or you already have a contract with an architect, and you're not asking for the grant funds to reimburse them, then you don't need to include that here. The form will auto-calculate the total project cost, which is the construction subtotal plus the contingency plus the consultant fees. But where you see the star there to the left, that's the grant request. The applicant must put in what the grant request is. So again, remember, it's 80% of the project total up to $100,000, unless you are a for-profit corporation, and then it will be 50% up to $100,000. At the bottom, be sure to indicate when you think the project will be finished. Um, Physical work, probably we have there estimated really won't begin before maybe June of 2026. And projects ideally will be completed within about 2 years of the grant award. So around, June of 2028 might be a realistic estimate, but you put what you think your timeline is for the project. The grant committee does take that into consideration, whether they think that's reasonable. And sometimes they do tend to want to focus on projects that are going to be done more quickly. So, but you want to be realistic because that will be put into your grant agreement, and you don't want to obligate yourself to something that you can't actually deliver on. So. At the bottom of the budget section is the opportunity to upload an attachment. Now, if you have more detail about your budget and how the budget is broken down, if you have an actual scope of work for your project with estimates from contractors, maybe you have plans from an architect that you would like to just show the grant committee, like, hey, we're already set and ready to go. We have everything in place. We're ready to get this project moving. You can upload those here. It's not a requirement. This field is not required. It's there just in case you have more explanation that you would like to provide for the budget or the scope of work. Please don't use this as a place to upload information to supplement other areas of your application. The grant committee won't necessarily look for that there. And if they open the file and it has nothing to do with the budget, they are inclined to probably just ignore it. I will note that this submission system, this form, has been updated by the company FormStack that we work with, and they allow pretty big, large document uploads. You'll see the max size is 25 megabytes. That's pretty big. So you can upload big documents, but your computer and your connection to the internet might impact how those documents actually get uploaded. And it may give you an error when you try to submit the project if the attachments are too big. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you have a really big attachment, theoretically the form may allow you to attach it, but when you go to hit submit, it may take forever and it may time out when you go to submit the project or the application. Just kind of depends on your internet speed and how much RAM and stuff your computer has. Mine sometimes struggles with that. So more to consider when you are developing your budget and how this will impact your grant if funded when we get to the grant the grant agreement stage. So this is just an example of what a typical grant might look like. You've been awarded the grant, you're doing the work, your contractor completes, let's say, the west side windows. That's a completed line on your grant agreement, and so you are ready to pay that bill and then ask for a reimbursement. Let's say your contract with your contractor allows you to withhold a 10% retainage. That is something that we encourage because it allows you as the property owner or the grantee to have some hold on the contractor to make sure that they finish the work according to your expectations. Not all contracts have that. Not all contractors are okay with that. But that is something that we kind of encourage. So on a $10,000 bill to the contractor, you pay $9,000 because it's 10,000 minus the 10%. So you have a invoice for $10,000 and you have proof of payment, whether that's a credit card receipt, a canceled check, whatever it is, a bank statement that shows you paid the contractor, a receipt. You will send that to the SHPO, to the Heritage Trust Fund grant manager with your reimbursement request, photos of the completed work, the invoice, the proof of payment, and we will do a calculation looking at 80% of the total invoice. We are not going to penalize you for withholding the 10% retainage. We will look at the invoice and say, okay, 80% of 10,000 is 8,000. And then we are going to withhold 10% retainage on the reimbursement. Because just like we would encourage you to withhold 10% as sort of a insurance that the project will be completed by the contractor, we are withholding 10% retainage as insurance that the project is going to be completed and seen to the completion of the grant agreement. So we will withhold 8 or 10% of our reimbursement. The reimbursement amount you actually see would be 7,200. So on an invoice of 10,000, if you paid 9,000, we would reimburse 8,000 minus retainage, and you would actually see a reimbursement of 7,200. This is really important to understand, again, how the cash flow works for your project, because many times people misunderstand and think, well, when I get reimbursement number one, then I will pay invoice number two. And when I get reimbursement number two, then I will pay invoice number three. You may not have the funds in hand through doing that to be able to pay those bills. You will need additional resources to be able to cash flow the project. Ultimately, the reimbursement will be at total 80% up to the grant award or $100,000 maximum. But through the course of the project, you will need to have some funds in hand to be able to make the project work. So just a couple of reminders again, with those distinct portion line items, 100% complete, we have to have that in order to do reimbursements. Those line items are laid out in the grant agreement. So the work that is being requested for reimbursement has to be in the grant agreement and has to be during the grant period. It cannot be something that is happening now before the grant is awarded, and it can't be something that happens after we close the grant out. There's no opportunity to come back afterward and say, oh, I forgot to ask you guys for reimbursement. The work has to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. That's why we ask for photographs. We can sometimes make site visits, but we can't always get to every project. So we do ask for photos to document that. And then we also ask for documentation of the bills, the invoices, the requisitions, the receipts, the proof of payment, whatever it is showing what was billed, what was paid for the work done, and how did you pay it. Some things that you will see on a contractor's contract, such as setup fees, material purchases, partial work done, we cannot reimburse for those things. That may be in the contract or the agreement between you and the contractor, and you do need to pay for those things if that's in the contract between you and them. The contract between me and you says that we reimburse for completed line items. So again, that's the cash flow, making sure that you have that sort of in mind as you're doing your budgeting and planning for your project. I will say that we talk sometimes in examples of like doing the west side windows, the north side windows, and as separate line items to help cash flow the project. That doesn't mean that that's going to be the best way to do the project or the cheapest or easiest way to do the project. It may be easier for a contractor to come out, take out all the windows, take them back to their shop, fix them, and then bring them all back and install them all in one shot. Asking your contractor to do that work as sort of side by side might actually increase the cost of the project. So again, making sure that you have some realistic expectations of how you will pay the bills and then seek reimbursement is important when you're writing your grant application. So, as I mentioned before, we do require competitive bidding as a part of hiring consultants or contractors. Because we use these grant funds as federal match and also because we are a state agency, we do have to follow procurement rules, and those pass down to you as the subgrantee. Whether you're seeking assistance of a consultant like an architect or an engineer or a qualified contractor, procurement of professional or construction services have to be carried out in a manner consistent with the grant policies described in the grant agreement and the grant manual. The required bidding process is outlined in Appendix A and B at the end of the program information handout that's attached to the website we linked earlier. Seeking competitive bids is a requirement of the program for any product or service over $5,000. So again, if you as the applicant are hiring someone, and let's say you know a really good guy down the street who's a great craftsman, and you're just needing him to do a certain little piece of work for you, and he's only going to charge you $4,500, you can contract with him directly. You don't have to go through a competitive bidding process. You do have to show us the contract, and we have to sign off on the language in the contract, but you can use whoever you want if it's under $5,000. Also, if you, as the applicant, the grantee, are buying materials, so let's say you're going to buy the paint or you're going to buy the lumber, and then hire someone to do the work. If you are expecting that material to be more than $5,000, there has to be a competitive process in place to buy that. If you're contracting with someone and they're going to be purchasing the materials, then that is part of their bid, and so that's fine. Um, Non-competitive, directly negotiated contracts can be approved by the Heritage Trust Fund grant staff, but it's on a case-by-case basis, and it really has to be a specific circumstance. For example, I was talking about the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe locomotive earlier. Their grant is for repair of the boiler system of that locomotive. Well, guess what? Not very many people do repairs on antique locomotives. So there's only like one or two people in the entire northern hemisphere that do that. So they had to solicit basically an approval from us to say, hey, can we use this one vendor that is the only one we know of? And that's that's that. Um, you were asking about bids. Yeah, general rule is to get three. I will say that it is a you are seeking at least three bids. There is not a requirement to get three bids. The procurement process, if you look at it in the grant, the program information, it is a process. You need to develop a scope of work or a list or a description of what you want the person to do for you. You put that out publicly for a number of days, and you send it directly to a minimum number of people, and you ask them to bid on it. At the end of the time that is allowed or allotted, if you only get back one bid, then that's all you get, and you can either take that bid or not, depending on if it's in your budget and if it's someone who's qualified. You're not required to spend months and months and months trying to get people to give you bids if they're just not, it's just not happening. It can be really challenging right now to get estimates and bids because contractors are extremely busy. Publicly publicly shared. Yes, a newspaper is great. Realistically, not as many people read the newspaper as they used to. So you can be creative. You can put it on a web page. You can put it on your social media. You can put it, on the local lumber yard has a bulletin board outside where all the contractors look for work. Whatever makes the most sense for your community and your project. I think the thing that makes the biggest impact and the most sense is to directly solicit contractors. We do have a list called our source list, which is a list of contractors and craftspeople and consultants that we know have experience doing work on historic properties. And we can provide that list to you. It's available on our website, but if you can't find it or you would like it emailed to you, reach out to us. It's not a end all be all list. It's not an approved list. It's just a list of places to start so that you could reach out to, here's a bunch of roofers, here's a bunch of masonry contractors, here's a bunch of architects or engineers that you could start asking for bids. Do we have a place on our website to post invitations to bid? We do, but it is something that we have to post. So if you send it to us, we can put it on that web page. I honestly don't know how many people look at that. We do have a Google group called Preserving Kansas that we typically send those out to when we're asked. And there's about 200 people on that list. I don't know how many of those people are contractors or craftspeople or consultants. So to answer that question. Section M is where we get into the rest of the attachments and submission of your grant application. So again, a note here, a word of warning that attachments may not stick or attach if you're saving the form to complete and resume later. So the recommendation is to wait to do those attachments until you are finished with the online application and are ready to submit it. A couple of things about the attachments that are requested. Please read each section very carefully. Before you upload the attachments, make sure you understand what we're asking for. Contact the SHPO if you have any questions or difficulties. There are on each section acceptable formats for the upload. Some of them you can do a PDF, JPEGs, or some of them are just a PDF. So just make sure you're attaching the right file. Again, a note about size of attachments. Again, the max size is allowing 25 megabytes, which is pretty big. If you attach 5 or 6 25 megabyte files, your submission is probably going to take a while and might time out before it actually goes through. So kind of keep that in mind when you're doing your uploads. The letters of support, this is where we mentioned earlier, you wanted to summarize the community support for the project. And so this is where you can upload up to 6 documents to demonstrate that support. You'll note that only 1 is required. So you could put 6 letters of support into one PDF document and upload it under letter number 1 and just call it good. Or you could upload 6 individual letters, however you want to do that. I will say that we always recommend getting letters of support from people who have a personal connection to the property. Letters from politicians and congresspeople, sometimes make an impression, but it doesn't really convey to the grant committee how it's going to impact the community. It's much more impactful and tugs at the heartstrings a little bit if you get letters from school kids that have toured the building and loved it, or a letter from the older couple who got engaged in the balcony of your historic theater. That kind of thing is going to make much more of an impact. And then photographic documentation of the property. You want to convey to the grant committee the physical condition of the project. And so photos are required, and we'll talk a little bit more about photos in a minute, how to kind of format those and tell your story. But read the description very carefully because we want one PDF document, or it can be a PowerPoint document if that's easier, with no more than 20 images. We don't want to overwhelm the grant committee with hundreds of images. We don't want to underwhelm them with 1 or 2 that don't tell them what they really need to know. So Think critically about what images tell your story and illustrate the need that you're asking them to grant you funds for, and be selective in how you select those images. So again, no more than 20 images included in one PDF or PowerPoint document. Um, Caption those images with descriptions. Make sure that they show features related to the items in your budget. If you show them 15 images about how great the property looks, and no images about how bad the situation is that you're trying to fix, then they're going to come away with the assumption that the property's fine and you don't need grant funds, right? So I always tell people to take really good photos of really bad things, and that's what you want to put into your grant application. Be aware of the quality of your photos. I'll show you an example here in a minute of maybe not such great quality. You want to be responsible for how those are presented and how visually appealing they are, as well as clear they are. Make sure that at least one of the photos, I usually recommend the first photo be the pretty picture, the one photo that shows your property in a good light, that conveys how significant it is, important it is to the community, how much of a landmark it is. These kind of photos are what we call three-corner shots, where you kind of see three corners of the building. You see two sides, the front and maybe one side, a little bit of the environment around the building. You can tell that the one on the top left is a barn in an agricultural setting, whereas the one on the bottom right is in a downtown commercial area. And that gives the grant committee a good sense of what the property looks like. And then you want to get into the bad stuff. You want to get into the pictures of the ugly things that you need fixed, corrected, repaired, updated. So you want to show close-ups of damage and deterioration. You can add illustrative, features like arrows or circles to point to things that may be hard for the grant committee to see. You can label your photos. I recommend that, and giving a little bit of description about what's going on in the photo. Um, you can use props like rulers, pencils, straight edges. Um, Maybe, you show the buckets that are catching the water from the leaky roof. You show a carpenter's level that to demonstrate how uneven the floors are. Anything like that to just convey visually what the need is and how this is an urgent problem that you need the grant committee to give you money for. Get creative. Feel free to, put multiple images on a page, but I would warn against putting so many images on each page that it overwhelms and sort of gets lost in the details. The grant committee is going to be looking at probably 45 to 60 applications. And so putting a bunch of images on one page so that you kind of keep it under the 20 limit is may backfire. It's not going to necessarily help the grant committee review your project. Be careful how you're showing details in perspective. Sometimes we get close-up photos of a crack in a white plaster wall, and you can't really see what is happening. You don't know what the line on the white background means. Or like this image of I guess it's a brick wall, but we don't know what we're seeing or what's happening here. So then at the end of the grant application, as I noted on once we got started, we were looking at where the grant application form lives on our website. I noted that there were three forms above the Apply Now button that you would need to download, sign, and then upload to your application. Those are attached here. So basically what these are is if your grant application is chosen for an award, there will be a bit more paperwork and processing to do before we can start getting the work underway. To help speed up the process, we're asking for these forms to be submitted with the application. So we have them on file when the time comes for your grant award to be encumbered in the state accounting system. This is really just to keep things moving quickly. We found in the last couple of years that there was a significant delay in some projects because we had to get these forms signed and it slowed down the process. So if we can have these ahead of time, that will help significantly. If you have some concern or situation where like you just can't get these assigned or attached, please let me know. They are required in the application form, but if worse comes to worse, you can upload a blank document and we can address that later. Last thing is the assurances. That is a required form that we need you to sign and upload. The assurances are listed out here on the application, but they're also listed on the form that you will print out and sign. Note especially a couple of these. Number 5 says grantees are expected to pay all project costs and then seek reimbursement for a portion of them. You have sufficient funds to match the grant and will pay all project costs as they come due and payable, then seek reimbursement upon completion of approved budget line items. And then number 6 says that the grant agreement will require owners to maintain ownership of the property for 5 years following completion of the grant, and also owners must maintain the grant funded work during that 5-year period. They will follow the guidelines established by the Kansas Historical Society, the HTF Grant Project Agreement, and the Heritage Trust Fund Grant Manual. So these are just things, statements saying that like if you are awarded the grant, you assure us that you agree and understand, you understand and agree to. So be sure and upload a copy of that. And then at the bottom right is the button to hit submit form. Remember again, the system is going to be transferring not just your narrative, but all of your attachment uploaded documents through the cloud up into the system that we can then see on the back end. So it may take a few seconds for you to see the confirmation message. I did a couple of tests here at work. We have a pretty fast internet connection. I did some pretty big files uploads, and it took probably 30 or 40 seconds for it to upload. So if your attachments are pretty big, it may take a few seconds to a minute to upload. Then once you hit submit and everything gets uploaded, you should see a confirmation message like the one that appears in the top left, saying that the submission is successful. There's also a note there that says applications will be considered by the grant review committee in February, and applicants will be contacted directly with specific dates and times, or watch for additional information on our webpage. Both the property owner and the grant administrator that you put on the application, the emails that you put into the application form, will receive an email containing a copy of the application. Excuse me. And that copy will contain links for all the attachments. Let the SHPO staff know if you would well, for example, if you don't receive the email, there could be a typo in an email address, or it could have got stuck in spam. Or if you wish to receive a copy of your application form in a PDF file, we can send that to you another way. So just finishing up here, and then any other questions you guys have, I'll try to answer those. But further thoughts, the Historic Preservation Office is here to help whether you receive a grant or not. So whether you are applying for tax credits or you just want to try to do the work yourself, you have other funding and you want to make sure that you're doing it according to the Secretary of the Interior standards, we can always help give you guidance on that. Your application itself, it's a great idea to have someone else read it, proofread it, edit it. Again, maybe put it into a Word document or something first, and have people read over it. If it makes sense to someone who doesn't know anything about your project, then it probably is going to make sense to the grant review committee. And with that, I am going to leave the screen on with our contact information. That way, if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to us there. Now I'm just looking down here. Yes, so how competitive is the program? Generally 40 to 60 applicants. We usually have enough funding to fund about a quarter to a third of applications. Recently, we've had about $40 million requested each year, and we usually have around $1 million to give out. So that is the competitive nature of the program. Someone to talk about ADA compliance. Yes. If you would reach out to us about the ADA compliance issue, yes, we can help you with that. Are you permitted to speak generally regarding prior year grantee projects, or is this information confidential specifically? Yes, we can always provide information about prior applications, including if the grant awards in February find out that your project is not funded, and you would like notes on what the grant committee thought about the application, we can find those. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's not anything specific about that particular grant application. It's just a matter of the competitive nature of the program. And they looked at 60 applications and they only had enough funding to do a quarter of them. And so some of them they felt were more worthy. Maybe geographically they were trying to distribute the funding. They may have thought a certain project was more urgent than another one, had more community benefit than another one, something like that. So, but yeah, if you want to reach out to me about that specific project that you're looking at, we can talk more about that. Okay. Is there any other questions? I don't see any raised hands or anything else in the chat. I am going to stop recording. I'll stay online for just a few more minutes, but thank you all for coming to this and joining us and watching this. As I said, the recording will be posted on our website later, so feel free to watch it again, go back through, pause it, read. We can also, I think we also will post a copy of the PowerPoint presentation with my notes. That way, if you would prefer to just look through the slides and read the notes, then that'll be an opportunity as well. All right, thank you guys.